to get started behind the scenes when they arrive. I'm Deborah Rose. I'm a member of CNY Solidarity and Invisible Onondaga County. I welcome you to tonight's New York 22 Congressional Primary Candidate Forum. The forum is being sponsored by the CNY Solidarity Coalition, Southside Coalition for Justice and Equality, Indivisible Onondaga County, CNY Indivisible, Indivisible Salt City, and Indivisible Cayuga. We want to thank the candidates, Sarah Klee Hood and John Mannion, for joining us this evening, and want to also thank the Institute of Technology at Syracuse Central for use of their facilities tonight. A little about the upcoming primary. There is no Republican New York 22 congressional primary this voting cycle. The winner of the Democratic primary will face off against the current New York 22 Congressman Brandon Williams in the November election. To vote in the Democratic primary, which is coming up next month, you must be a registered Democrat. There will be 3 ways that you can vote in the primary. You can vote by mail using an early mail ballot or an absentee ballot. You can vote in person at one of the early voting sites from June 15th to June 23rd, or you can vote in person at your designated polling place on primary day. There's more information on voting provided by the League of Women Voters at the welcome table, and you can also visit elections.newyork.gov or the website of your County Board of Elections for more information. This evening's forum will be made up of 2 main sections. First, both candidates will have an opportunity to respond to a set of questions prepared by the sponsors, and then we'll open the floor to questions from the audience that can be directed to one or both of the candidates. And then we also have time set for the candidates' opening and closing remarks, and afterwards you'll be able to have an opportunity to meet the candidates, to find out about their campaigns, and any volunteer opportunities with their campaigns. We're asking that no video or audio recordings be made during the forum other than the cameras that are out. A video will be available on the CNY Solidarity Coalition website within the next couple of days. Now I'd like to turn it over to our moderator for the evening, Tom Keck, also a member of CNY Solidarity Coalition and Indivisible Onondaga County.
Thanks, Deborah. I'm Tom Keck, and please join me in welcoming our candidates, John Mannion and Sarah Klee Hood. So Deborah went over most of the ground rules, so I'm just going to jump right in. We're going to start with opening statements. We've got a timekeeper right here in the front. We're going to invite each candidate to make a 2-minute opening statement. Then I'm going to ask a series of questions. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond, and then we're going to turn it over to the audience for questions. So I randomly selected the order, and we'll alternate it. So we're going to invite Sarah Klee Hood to make her opening statement first. Sarah, take it away.
Good evening. Can everybody hear me? Yes. I'm delighted to be here. Thanks to all of the Indivisible, the coalitions that were able to put this event together. My name is Sarah Klee Hood, and I'm running to represent you in New York's 22nd Congressional District. I was born and raised in rural Madison County. I'm a daughter of labor. My dad's a retired IBW electrician, and my mother's a former SEIU nurse. I'm the first in my family to graduate from college. Yes, I'm a millennial carrying student debt. When I graduated from college, I commissioned into the U.S. Air Force, where I was an operations officer for 6 years. I was a captain that had a team of 140, a budget of $25 million. I did federal policy, foreign policy, and was a national security advisor. When it was time for my husband and I to leave the military, we chose to come back to Central New York to raise our 2 daughters who now attend public school. I've stayed at home as a stay-at-home parent, results in about 10 to 15 years. I've worked in the private sector, managing multi-million-dollar budgets in global teams spread across the world. And most recently, I worked in the environmental policy sector. I worked in economic development, helping small businesses right here in the footprint of NY22 that were creating green technology. I helped them not only grow their business, but also I created jobs right here in Central New York. That's more experience I would love to bring up to the federal sector to ensure that Central New York is equipped to have both the jobs and the talent to help our economies grow. And I'm also elected. I'm a town councilor here in the town of DeWitt. I ran on sidewalks because I firmly believe sidewalks build communities. And you know what? We're getting 2 brand new sidewalk programs as a result of the American Rescue Plan Act. Again, I am delighted to be here, and as we look towards the election in November, I'd like to remind everybody, this is bigger than me, it's bigger than you, it's bigger than all of us. This is about saving democracy and ensuring that Democrats win back NY22. The biggest difference this time around, we are a Biden plus 11. That means that this seat is likely to be held by a Democrat for the next 10 years. Why don't we go ahead and put in a Democrat that's going to drive the policies and changes we need here in Central New York for our communities to grow? Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. My name is John Mannion. I'm a current New York State Senator representing the 50th Senate District. The majority of my adult life, I was an educator, as was my wife. I have taught for almost 30 years. Collectively, we taught for 60. I taught at Christian Brothers Academy, Nottingham High School, and for about the last 20 years, I taught at West Genesee. It was the 2016 election that drove me to run for office. And prior to that, it was changes to public education that didn't make sense and was not good for kids that caused me to become even more political. So after 2016, I ran in an open seat, a seat held by John DeFrancisco for 26 years, and prior to him, Tarky Lombardi for 26. You can look back 100 years to Republican representation. I ran in 2018 against a seated county comptroller in an open seat. I lost by 2%, but 2 years later, I flipped that seat. And 2 years after that, with redistricting, I'm proud to say that I won an election where I am the only Democratic senator out of 42 that has more registered Republicans in their district, and 7,000 more Republicans voted in that election. So we can win this election. I'm proud of the work that I've done in the New York State Senate. We have preemptively, prior to the overturning of Roe v. Wade, protected a woman's right to choose and protected those providers that provide those services to women. This year, on the ballot, due to the 2 last legislative sessions, the only 2 that I've been involved in, we have the Equal Rights Amendment on the ballot to be voted on and approved. It's long overdue. As a teacher, I'm proud to say that we have fully funded the foundation aid formula. We have expanded universal pre-K into this region. And finally, I'll say, as somebody who's lived here my whole life and watched the job losses, I'm proud to be the co-prime sponsor on green chips legislation, which brought Micron into this region. Thank you all.
Thanks so much. And John, you can hold the mic, so I'll let you respond first for the next question,
Sure.
for the first question. So we've got a number of great sponsoring organizations here tonight. Several of the groups are indivisible groups affiliated with the National Indivisible Movement, which started shortly after the 2016 election. And as I think both of our candidates know, one of the principal sort of issue priorities for the indivisible groups, both locally and nationally, since that beginning in early 2017, has been democracy reform. So our first question tonight is for each of the candidates. Could you tell us your top 3 priorities for protecting and expanding U.S. democracy? And please be as specific as you can. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. I will have to go back to reference, in 2 minutes is a short time, so I'd like to thank the organizations that have decided to put this together. It's greatly appreciated. But what we would have to make sure, the first thing that we need to do when it comes to our democracy is make sure that voting is accessible to all and protected. And in the state of New York, I have a great record of voting on legislation and sponsoring legislation to make sure that our elections are secure. I was proud to support the Voting Rights Act. We have done many things here, including expanded, we've initiated early voting. early voting should be happening across this country. I have my own legislation, which I would want to take to Congress to make sure that we have a minimum number of election commissioners in each county in this state. That is my legislation. It has passed the Senate, and we're hoping to have that signed into law. We need minimum requirements for our elections officials as we continue to expand at the federal level the ability to vote by mail, and making sure that our systems that are valid, that are double-checked, and that are functioning have the professional workforce to be able to accomplish and pull off those elections the way that they should. I also believe that we need stricter penalties on individuals that threaten election workers. That should be a federal offense and a crime, and any assault or subversion of election has to be addressed at a much tougher level. So I didn't enumerate those, but I appreciate the opportunity to answer, and I appreciate the question. Thank you.
All right, this is nothing like a fresh question to keep you on your toes. First and foremost, I think we need SCOTUS reform. If we want to truly see the America that our forefathers, that our Constitution upholds, for an America that is just and equal for all, it begins with ensuring that our Supreme Court is held to its own standards and has a code of ethics. Let's expand the bench if we need to do that. We have historical context for it. Number two, let's get that money out of politics. I ran for this seat last cycle. I had $500,000 of dark special interest money spent against me. You better believe that I firmly believe there's no role for money in politics. And until we start electing people that don't take special interests, that reject the notion of dark money, we're going to continue to get more of the same. And lastly, of course, it is voting and expanding voting rights. It's ensuring that ballot access is for everybody, that we are taking away timelines in terms of when you're eligible to enroll for a party. What do special elections look like? What does it look like for early voting across this nation? It's ensuring that this isn't a partisan effort or exercise, that every state has the same rules and regulations moving forward to ensure that all of the folks here in America have an opportunity to participate, not only in their political system, but in their lives, in their community, and in our joint future. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. We'll start with you on this one. Thanks. So next question is focused on climate change. So could you both tell us what do you see as the key local impacts here in Central New York of climate change, and what are your key priorities that you would pursue in Congress to address them?
I actually left a very good paying private sector job because I fundamentally believe that we are in the climate crisis right now. It's not in 10 years, it's not in 20 years. We are seeing the shifts right now. So what are my priorities? Number one is protecting Central New Yorkers and our way of life. I've lived in every corner of the US, and one of our leading determinants to move back home was our environment. And as we start looking towards that, it's an understanding of how do we do things here locally? How can folks do things in their house that not only helps their small little world that they're living in, but our greater community? So it's about educating folks, ensuring that we have practices in place. Education here in Syracuse is very different, the environmental issues here in Syracuse are very different than they are over in Madison County. Here in Syracuse, we need to start talking about air quality. We have 81 down. What does our particulate matter look like right now for the folks that are living around that area? For the farmers, they're the first to see the environmental shifts of the climate. Did you know that our number one economic resource here and output generator of our number one export here in the Central New York region is farming, is agriculture. And if we're not providing our farmers with the tools and resources they need to address climate change, we're ultimately all going to suffer as our local economy will go down. I think another thing to look at is, did you know Central New York is a global hub for fresh water? So when we're talking about freshwater reservoirs, Central New York is a top 10. We don't have the resources, the policies, and the regulations in place to protect our waters. How many folks remember when Sylvan Beach was closed last year, or Skinny Atlas had harmful algal blooms? Those are a direct result of climate change. We need somebody that has the experience not only in environmental policy, but the understanding of what a workforce in the green economy looks like as we begin to transition into a global economy where Central New York will be an eye, not only nationally, but internationally with our great environmental resources. Thank you.
Thank you. To answer the question, locally, the #1 threat to our area is harmful algal blooms as it relates to climate change. Our drinking water, we have some of the greatest resources of fresh, clean, and accessible water. Harmful algal blooms, which I taught over the course of 25 years at the college level. I taught about the eutrophication of lakes. I taught about sequestering carbon and combustion. So in my time as New York State Senator, #1, we had to make sure we addressed the detection and remediation of harmful algal blooms, and I've worked with various organizations and municipalities in supporting funding to do that. Outside of that, New York State is a leader, and I'm proud to say that I've been endorsed by the League of Conservation Voters in every one of my elections, including this election, because I am a champion as it comes to combating climate change and making this aggressive but pragmatic transition away from fossil fuels. We have a record of that in the state. We have to embolden the grid. We have to make sure that we're siting new wind, new solar, new battery storage. I'm proud to be a part of the Energy Committee and the Environmental Conservation Committee where we are doing those things. And while we do that, we also have passed, with your support, the Environmental Bond Act, a constitutional amendment to clean water and clean air, so that if that is violated, we can litigate against it. And while we do all of those things, we are investing in our infrastructure, emboldening our grid, clean water, filtration systems, and beyond. We need to do that at the federal level. We are doing it at the federal level under this current administration. We are investing in our children's future by making sure that everyone has clean water. Thank you.
And John, we'll start with you for this next question. So we're going to shift our attention to foreign policy now. So for both of you, what do you see as the key steps in moving towards peace and justice in the Middle East? And what role do you think that Congress can play in facilitating that path? And let me also add, so I teach at SU, as you know, if any of our SU student encampment protesters were here with us this evening, what would be your message to them? Thanks.
Yes, well, this is a very complicated issue that has been existing for a very long time, many generations. And before October 7th, I was very clear that we need a two-state solution and a peaceful solution in the Middle East. And the United States must be a leader, as they have in other instances, to broker that solution and use partners around the globe to make sure that happens. Obviously, we're in a dynamic moment where I think we all want the same thing. We want peace. We want a two-state solution. We certainly do not want the loss of innocent life. So the United States is moving more aggressively in the right direction. And the administration, which plays a major role in that, is taking action to hold, both entities accountable more than they had before. And I do believe that that is the will of the American people. That is where many of us are. But we do have a unique relationship with Israel. And we have that state was established for a reason after the most horrific human event in the last hundreds of years. We must remember that. And it is our unique relationship with Israel which has helped to maintain a democracy in the Middle East, and our allies around the world to keep, over the course of the past 75 years with our NATO alliances, a level of peace. I say to the people who were in the encampments at Syracuse University, they have a right to protest. It is a fundamental right in this country. I believe that the majority did it respectfully, that there were not instances in the majority of time related to anti-Semitism. But we want schools, hospitals, institutions to be free of hate, and we have to hold those accountable when that occurs. So we'll always protect the right to free speech. And we saw that the majority of the time at Syracuse. I tell those individuals, this is the United States of America, they have a right to be heard, and they should do that, and did do it, I believe, mostly in a respectful way. And I commend them for standing up for their beliefs in this country and helping to make sure that those rights are never lost.
Like many, I was horrified by the events of October 7th and what that meant, not locally, or for us here locally, but globally. As we start looking towards that two-state solution, we must have a bilateral ceasefire. We need to be able to bring home the hostages and ensure that we stop the civilian death toll. As an officer who's commanded troops that have lost their lives both in war and on the way home through PTSD, there is no winner in war when there are deaths at the hands. And so I strongly urge that that the bilateral ceasefire move forward to ensure that we are able to reduce the loss of civilian lives. To the students who are at SU and all of the other campuses demonstrating their right to freedom of speech, I commend them for their bravery, for their use of peaceful tactics to show that they don't agree with our government, that they want their voice heard, and more importantly, for participating in democracy. I can't tell you how many young adults I've spoken with over the last few years that are burnt out on the government. They're burnt out on politics. They don't see a great future for them. Their world is on fire. The environment is in a crisis. They have lived through so many traumatic events. So for these young adults to stand up, find a collective voice, and use it, we need more of that peaceful protest to show where our voices and our concerns are, to let our elected officials know what's important to them. There's also another side to that story, though. Yes, there were many peaceful protesters across the U.S. on campuses, but there's also a lot of young adults who are now having to redirect their lives because they're not sure where they'll be safe. How disheartening is that? If you choose your environment, your university, college that you want to attend because it has a great program, and now you're having to rethink your entire future because you are afraid where your safety may live, in a time when you are supposed to be experimenting with life and figuring out who your truest sense of you are. So at the end of the day, I look forward to talks of a bilateral ceasefire to ensure that we are minimizing the human death toll, ensuring that our students have safe spaces to demonstrate their First Amendment rights. And I look forward to communicating and speaking with all of you to learn where you're, And I look forward to speaking with all of you to learn more of your interests. Thank you.
We'll start with you, Anderson, Sarah. So 2 years ago, the Supreme Court reversed Roe versus Wade. Since that time, access to abortion services has been severely curtailed in much of the country. What is your plan in response?
I'm going to Washington fighting like hell to recodify Roe. As a woman whose rights have been stripped away, I am mad. Women are not second-class citizens. This is about personal freedom. More importantly, it is about access to safe and legal abortion care. I'm raising 2 young daughters. I want them to have the future of their choice. I don't want them to be curtailed because politicians decided that they know better. This is a decision that lives solely with a woman and their provider. Outside of that, it is the responsibility of the woman and their provider to choose the best path forward. And you know, as somebody, when I was serving in the military, I had to seek abortion services. It was one of the most difficult, challenging times of my life. I didn't have health care coverage for it, and I didn't get time off for it. It is a uniquely personal decision, and everybody is entitled to hold their own personal rights in this space, but at the end of the day, it is the federal government's job and responsibility to ensure that women are able to make that choice on their own in their space that they need. And you better believe Republicans like Brandon Williams are hell-bent on ensuring there's a national abortion ban. So yes, while New York is protected in this moment and in this day, that's not a guarantee anymore. And when our young women are having to decide where they're going to go to college or where they're going to begin their lives based on what states' laws are in place right now, we have simply failed them and the next generation that will come after them. So yes, I'm fired up, and who better to fight for women's rights that has been through it, that is raising the next generation of strong women and will ensure that this is a matter between a woman and her provider alone. Thank you.
What we've seen across this country is really unbelievable and something that we wouldn't have imagined just a few years ago in what has happened to many of these state laws. In New York State, we have protected a woman's right to choose and protected their providers. We have also protected the ability for physicians to send out abortive medications out of the state without litigation, and I'm proud to have been a part of those things to embolden our laws to protect a woman's right to choose and to make sure that those decisions are between a woman and their healthcare provider. A national abortion ban is absolutely something that will be pushed if we lose the House, the Senate, and the White House. And we have seen that we have a Supreme Court that is willing to support that. We cannot trust the words coming out of elected officials in Washington. And they've already shown that that is the case. So I'm proud to have been endorsed by Planned Parenthood in all three of my previous elections. I have a 100% scorecard from that organization. We are in the midst of a fight to make sure that fundamental rights for women are protected. And I stand with those women and have acted on it at the state level, and will bring that to the federal level to assure that women's rights are protected across this country. Thank you.
Thanks, John. For our next question, we're going to turn to some key issues of local economic development and racial justice that lots of us have been following for a number of years now. So I want to kind of link two different things together here and leave it up to you how to respond in 2 minutes as best you can, right? So one is the I-81 project, right, which many of us in the room have been closely following for a number of years. That project, of course, is now underway. The overpass is going to come down. The community grid is going to replace it, but of course, there's lots of outstanding questions of implementation and how we can do this job as best we can to right some of the historical wrongs that hit the 15th Ward. One of our current major focuses in local politics, of course, is the Micron project, right? And here too, lots of us in the room have questions about how this project is going to be implemented. There's housing implications, there's transportation implications, there's climate implications. So for both of you, I want to know, what do you see as the role of Congress in particular in monitoring and facilitating the successful implementation of these projects, and what will your priorities be if we send you to DC?
That was a 2-minute question. It was really too easy for me to appreciate that. Now I'm down to 1 minute 50 seconds. First of all, on 81, I was always a supporter of the community grid. I made that very clear. And as a lifelong Central New Yorker and a history buff and somebody who asks questions, hearing the stories of how the 15th Ward was torn apart, a thriving community, is something that even this far down the road we can never undo, but we are doing what we can now to tie these communities together, and not only do that because this is a federal interstate highway and the funding is largely coming from the federal government, but to engage the public, as I have as a New York State Senator, even though the areas of I-81 that I represent are not in that 15th Ward community. And I think what we saw from engagement with the state and others, that when the community speaks up and there are concerns about that highway and stop signs right at Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Elementary School, that when we advocate together, including with our elected officials, we get the necessary changes that are in the best interest of the community that's the most impacted. And we saw that happen. On Micron, there are questions about Micron, but I will say this, as the CHIPS and Science Bill was moving through at the federal level, companies like Micron could have gone anywhere, and some did. But we worked in the state legislature, and I, as the co-prime sponsor of that piece of legislation, made sure that someone, like if we were gonna onshore semiconductor manufacturing in this country, which we're going to do it in New York. And we're doing it in Klee, New York, in my district, using two big keys: great paying union jobs, and the utilization of something we're better at than anywhere else almost in the world, which is the generation of clean carbon-free energy. It's coming, and it's transformational, and I'm proud to be a part of it. Thank you.
I talk relatively fast, and 2 minutes is still going to be a crunch. So let's see what we can do. In terms of I-81, I remember my first interview when I announced last time to run for Congress. I was speaking with one of the news reporters, and I went around and around in a circle, and he finally just said, "Sarah, where do you stand?" And I said, "Haven't you heard me? I support the community grid." And he goes, "No, I heard every other federal policy related to what will happen when 81 comes down." So I'm here to tell you, since day one, I have supported the community grid. It is what our community needs, but you best believe that I'm relatively pragmatic and I want to make sure that this is done right. The highway has come down, but do we have housing for all of those families of our community members that are living in that area right now? Are we ensuring that there is federal oversight through housing and urban development? Are we ensuring that the Department of Transportation is looking to ensure that folks that are being displaced have equitable transportation to get to their jobs once they're relocated? These are just a few of the areas where federal government has an active and necessary role in the I-81 transformation. Now, when we talk about Micron, transformational is a great word. It can do for Central New York what Microsoft did to Seattle. We are talking about a big game here. But with that, it's more than a ribbon-cutting ceremony. This is about ensuring that Central New Yorkers that have lived here for generations aren't pushed aside and left out of this big piece of the pie. So there's absolutely room for the federal government to ensure that Micron is being held to the standards that they already agreed to. What does that look like? Ensuring that the environmental protections they've agreed to are in place. Because as of right now, New York State does not have the renewable resources to be able to supply Micron at its fullest, while ensuring our communities have power and electricity when they need it. That's a big gap to fill. Let's ensure that the EPA is on target with the water that will be recycled through Lake Ontario. Again, the Department of Transportation, ensuring that there is infrastructure in place so folks are able to get to work without driving through neighborhoods and communities with small children. What do our healthcare services look like with an inundation of folks coming in? What does childcare look like? Our school districts that are strapped for cash right now, they're going to have an influx of thousands of students over the next 10 to 20 years. Yes, there's absolutely a role for the federal government in both of these two projects. And you better believe it's going to take somebody that understands the many layers of federal policy to be able to ensure that Central New Yorkers are not left behind, but instead raised up, and we are all seeing the gains of this transformation.
I'll keep this next one briefer. So for both of you, again, what are your top priorities in the area of policing and criminal justice reform?
As somebody who's served on my town of DeWitt's police commission for quite a few years now, I think there's a lot of roles that we can do here. Number one, it's ensuring that we start new initiatives. Yes, police have a role in our community, but not if it is responding to mental health crises or other areas where they don't have that expertise. So we need to ensure that we are properly funding police departments such that they have social workers and mental health responders in the vehicles with them when they respond to every single call. Because the majority of times, as I've learned, it's not a safety or policing issue, it's a mental health or a family issue. And we need to start respecting there's a difference there. I've also learned that, not all cops are bad cops. Just like not all folks are bad folks, right? But at the end of the day, our policing units are overstretched. We have a severe lack of interest in folks willing to sign up to be police officers. It is what it is. But what is the outcome of that on our communities? That means our communities aren't getting the good cops at their best. It means our communities are getting folks that are overworked, overtired, underpaid, and highly stressed. Those don't respond for good responses at all. That's kindling right there for a bad interaction with a good police officer. And I think one of the most simplest things that we've installed at the town of DeWitt is community policing. What is community policing? It's when you have that same officer showing up in the same community day after day, high-fiving the kids on their way out of school, playing basketball with them, building rapport, building trust. If I've learned nothing through my journey, it is that there is a lack of trust between our communities and our police officers. So let's start building a sense of trust, opening that pipeline, so that when folks do need to call the police, they aren't in fear of their life as a result of the police officer showing up. They know that the officer is on their side and going to do their job with a mental health service provider if needed. There's a lot of room for improvement, but it doesn't come if we sit here idly twiddling our thumbs, think that things are going to be okay in 5 to 10 years. We need folks that understand keenly what does policing look like at the local level beyond the talking points and the funding structures. Thank you.
When it comes to policing, I think there's major themes here, and one of those major themes is that we can have safe communities and accountability. Those two things can work together, and we are a better community, and the policing is better when those things happen. The second thing I'd like to say is I think we also can all agree that what we need are members of a police force that are a good reflection of the community they serve. We need to continue to diversify our police forces and support them, support actions that allow for that to occur, including civil service reform that make sure that truly, truly we have a police force that's reflective of the community. And that can include things that we've seen in this region and other places where there is a residency requirement for police officers to serve in their community. And finally, I'll say that we need to support our officers. We just lost the life of 2 individuals. Remember their families. I have members of my family that are in law enforcement, certainly many friends, both retired and active. And we know that this is a tremendous impact on the families. I have supported the state level mental health programs for families and officers at both the Onondaga County Sheriff's Department and the Oswego City Police Department. Finally, I'll say this. We do have to acknowledge the challenges that exist in staffing, and I took action. The Syracuse Regional Airport Authority Police Force was created just a short time ago with my piece of legislation. So we were used to, many of us, throughout the course of our lives, the Syracuse Police Department being able to cover that. They could not. So I created, with my legislation, the first police force in this state in the last 50 years because our community needed it. Thank you.
Thanks, John. So we're going to shift gears here now. I'm going to let both our candidates catch their breath for a second while I tell you how this next portion is going to work. So we're going to open it up to audience questions. We got a great turnout here. There's a lot of people in the room. Being the teacher that I am, my main goal now for this next period is to get as many people into the conversation as possible, right? So candidates, I'll give you 2 minutes if you need it, if somebody asks a complicated question, but I'm going to encourage you to give briefer responses when you're able to. And folks in the audience, you're going to raise your hand. I'm going to come to you with the mic. I'm gonna do my best not to let go of it. You can't have it. And I'm gonna encourage you to keep your questions brief, and I'm gonna encourage you to ask only one question. And if I call on everybody whose hand is up, and then you got a second one, and we can get back to you, that's gonna be awesome. We're also gonna save a little time at the end, where you can mingle with the candidates. So if you have a follow-up that I didn't let you ask, maybe you can grab them at the end.
My question is, what do you see as Brandon Williams' vulnerabilities, and how might you make use of them in running for this seat?
His biggest vulnerability, he wants a national abortion ban. We are fired up. We don't need the polls to tell us that this is the #1 issue nationally, though it is. Is it within New York State? Of course it is. And yes, it is here in Central New York. My grandmother fought this fight. My mother fought this fight. I'm fighting this fight so our daughters and granddaughters don't have to. But outside of that, he receives a significant amount of money from special interests, Harlan cronies, and dark forces, dark money. I'm proud to be the only candidate running in this race who has rejected all of that in any of my races. I am a small dollar donor, $34 average candidate. And I think that is something that we can hold them accountable as we talk about the destruction that money and special interest money does in politics and ultimately democracy at large. When we talk about Brandon Williams, we should also talk about the fact that yes, he has voted to cut veteran spending. Why does that matter here in Central New York? Because we have a huge veteran community. We are able to support not only a VA hospital, but also a satellite clinic with a closed Air Force base. That means that we've got a lot of veterans right here, and once you know it, they're pretty pissed off at Brandon Williams. What a great way to catch a win in November 2022 by having a Democrat on the seat that can compete with another veteran. And the fact that he's simply not a Central New Yorker. He doesn't share our values. When you asked him what was his position on gun reform at a town hall, he simply didn't have a position. Well, let me tell you, as a mom raising 2 young daughters in public school who are terrified of the notion of guns in schools and who have to live through active shooter drills, that's not an acceptable answer. Our young children are not okay. And it's simply because we are allowing organizations such as the NRA to fuel the pockets of politicians. So there are many vulnerabilities to Brandon Williams. And I think the biggest being is many.
Brandon Williams' biggest vulnerability is the strength of our unity. That is what is going to beat Brandon Williams. When we don't stand together united, we lose. I have made a pledge that I will stand by, that I will support any Democratic candidate, not after primary day, before primary day, all along. I've run for office. I've only run in general elections, and I've had the luxury, I will call it, to have the support of the Democratic Party united behind me. Brandon Williams is not from here. He does take big money from outside of the region. He is not a good reflection of the district. I've lived here my whole life. If you read the article 2 days ago, 89% of my supporters are from the district. Brandon Williams, 27% of those. I said the district, I meant the state. Within the district, 73% of my supporters are there. Our unity comes in many forms. It's not just Democrats. It's 27 labor unions and the League of Conservation Voters that stand with me in an effort to defeat Brandon Williams. It takes an army. It takes multiple armies working together towards a cause to preserve democracy, preserve a woman's right to choose, reject national right-to-work legislation which would dismantle the ability to organize and tear away workers' rights. It takes unity. Stay united, because I'm going to. Thank you.
My name is Yvonne Griffin. I'm a Citizen Action of New York member, volunteer leader, And this question is to both of you guys, and I'm asking this question because I have medical debt on my record, and that was a huge problem for me to get any type of private housing here. So medical debt is a big problem in Central New York. According to the Urban Institute, 13.5% of residents in the Congressional District 22 have medical debt, and the rate is double in zip codes that are primarily people of color, which is 13204. Do you support the Medicare for All Act that would shift power from the insurance corporations towards public control of healthcare resources and increase community control and increase equality based on the race, gender, sexuality, citizenship, age, and the ability to pay, because I was on Medicaid and I have this on my thing, and because medical debt reports to all 3 credit bureaus, this is a federal thing too. Thank you.
Thank you, John. So a few things, there's a lot there, and I'll try to address as much of it I can and as thoroughly as I can. But I will say that what we have done in the state of New York is expanded coverage and affordability to 99% of the population. That has occurred over the course of the time where I came into office. It was about 92%. We also recently have passed legislation to prevent litigation of medical debt, and that has moved through the Senate, and I'm hopeful that it will go through the Assembly and be signed by the governor. There's also actions that have been taken at the federal level to make sure that we expand the number of services that are provided to individuals free of cost, and we saw that in the pandemic with testing and vaccinations. The transformation of our healthcare system is one that is necessary exactly because of the story that we just heard about. And we can make that transition. I do believe that in the state and transfer to the federal level, we can do it in a practical way. That means coverage for individuals 0 to 4. That means coverage while pregnant and maternal coverage. There are insurance carriers in this state and in this country that enjoy the insurance that they have. They don't want to leave that insurance. But what we have to continue to fight for is a more just and more affordable system, like capping the cost of insulin, like being able to truly negotiate drug prices. And that is a way to keep costs down and to keep people out of debt by restricting litigation against them. We do have grant programs in the state, and we need that at the federal level. We can move the needle to expand more coverage in programs like Medicare and Medicaid to make sure that individuals are protected, while the goal should be that everyone has coverage and there is equity in healthcare. That is going to be a tremendous leap to get there, and we will need buy-in to get there. Thank you.
Healthcare is a human right, so to answer your question, absolutely. If Medicare for All isn't the way that we're going to call it, if we're comfortable calling it universal healthcare or whatever name we want, as long as it is an option for everybody, it includes basic healthcare, brings in vision, dental, mental health, while ensuring that Medicare can negotiate prescription prices, I'm all in. And do you know why I'm all in? Because I have the experience. I've had private healthcare, public healthcare, and 2 different flavors of universal healthcare. One in the military called TRICARE, and the service that I use now, the VA healthcare system. And let me tell you, they've been around for decades. They work. I'd say it's the bee's knees, but that's not very professional. Every healthcare system that I've been in has had its challenges, right? But if we're not treating healthcare as a right, and if we're not prioritizing the funding, we are failing the citizens of this great nation. So I would love to bring any of the platforms that are universal healthcare like, whether it's the VA model, the Medicare model, or the TRICARE model. Let's bring those nationally, because we already have a framework that we know is accessible and successful. This isn't a big leap. We've already got models in place. But I will also let you know that on this journey to get there, I will support any legislation that brings us closer to that model. Because it might be too big of a leap to take today, but it should always be the goal to ensure that we are prioritizing healthcare because it is a human right. Thank you.
I'm union president of State Medical University, and we've heard about two big transformations happening, I-81 and Micron, and the infrastructure changes that are going to be needed to make those things happen. I know right now all of our hospitals are full, 100% of the time. And what I haven't heard enough of yet is how we're going to build and strengthen and expand the healthcare infrastructure here to meet the demands of Micron. And so my question to you is, what do you plan to do, and how can the federal government assist in making that?
That's a fantastic question. I wish I didn't have to go first. I think it again goes back to prioritization. What do we fundamentally believe Americans should be able to prioritize? And healthcare is one of them. Yes, our hospitals are full. My mom's a nurse over at Crouse Hospital. She hasn't retired yet because her job is still in high demand. What do we do about that? First, I would talk to the experts and see if we have some solutions in the room. But I think at the end of the day, yes, the US government has a role to do that. And what does that look like? I'm going to take a wild guess and think that a lot of our hospitals here in Central New York, specifically Syracuse, are full because we have a lot of rural healthcare facilities, or we have a lot of rural folks that are driving in from a few hours away. We're a regional hub right here. So one thing that we can do is we can start exploring what does a rural healthcare system look like in the US. The VA already has this model. It's population driven, and based off of the population, they provide certain services outside of a main arterial region such as Syracuse. So let's start looking at what does rural healthcare look like across the United States. And the reason I say this is because when you think about the US, we have New York City, Boston, LA, Chicago, DC. Those are our big cities. We're not getting any more of those. But what we are getting are a lot more communities like ours here in Syracuse, out in Utica, out in Cayuga. A lot of small neighborhoods and communities that are the fabric of the US. So let's start thinking about this in a global sense, recognizing that there are only so many cities with hubs, and let's start looking at rural healthcare. It also goes to ensuring that we have insurance programs that are designed for healthcare in mind. That's preventative services. A lot of folks are coming through our EDs because they don't have access to quality healthcare, and because they don't have access to quality healthcare, they're putting off their small medical issue today, which ultimately is catastrophic in a couple months or a few years. So let's start preventative medical, community-driven healthcare centers, and we can start it at the school systems, like we have. And I believe it's Wheat. I was just over there on Tuesday. Anyways, community centers in our schools that will allow the children to get on the right path. And as we move forward, we need to start looking at other community-based opportunities. We've got a few here in Syracuse, but again, it's ensuring that the communities outside of these larger hubs have access to adequate, sufficient, and affordable health care so that we aren't being inundated at the ER, because that's what ultimately will happen if we don't have those services available. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. You know, Upstate Medical Center, I'm gonna select them, is not just our largest employer in the county or in the region. It is a safety net hospital. It is, for dozens of counties, a level 1 trauma center. It is the only burn unit in over 40 counties, and maybe I may have the burn and the poison flipped, but of the 62 counties in this state, Upstate serves 56 or 7 of those counties as it relates to I think it's the poison unit. We must support our healthcare institutions. And over the past several years, we have finally significantly increased Medicaid reimbursement rates. So for those safety net hospitals, it can have a level of cost effectiveness to serve our entire community. So we really, prior to just a few years ago and my term in the state legislature, have forgotten our nursing homes and our hospitals and our long-term care facilities and our assisted care facilities. And now we are significantly investing in those. And I will say to what Sarah had mentioned, every community does not have a hospital, but every community does have a school. And when students and families can easily access their health care, it is the top form of preventative medicine that you can have. Early diagnosis, early detection, and early access. I'm 100% and have been for years 100% supportive of community schools. It is a model that works, and it is a model that touches very closely every family in this state and in this country, because the school is right next door.
Hi, I'm Dr. Terry Hargrave, and I'm asking a question on behalf of Peace Inc., who have just recently done their 10-year community needs assessment and talked about some of their findings this morning. They couldn't be at this meeting, Todd Gailey and Maribel Arce, but they did give me a question that they would like to pose to the two of you. We keep hearing about all these opportunities coming to our region, the jobs they will bring, and the services and infrastructure that are being developed for these employers. But what about the people who are the core of the community that are here now? Currently, city-county residents are experiencing housing affordability crisis and a pressing food insecurity crisis. Plus, there are structural inequities in transportation, education, safety, and healthcare that limit access to services and jobs. How will you respond to their current needs? What policies are you proposing that will remove the structural barriers from the past, like redlining, as we build the future?
I'll try to get it in 2 minutes. Thank you, Harry. There are many of these items that we work on at the state level, and I absolutely will transfer them to Congress. We have to invest in our systems. When it comes to child care, there was an initiative to expand child care and child care deserts and micro deserts to the tune of $100 in funding, so established healthcare or child care institutions can grow and new ones can be created. At the same time, we increased the percentage above the federal poverty level where an individual can receive that subsidy. Number two, we have made great strides in expanding universal school meals in the state, buying into a federal program. I could go into the details, but I can't do it in 2 minutes, but we made that a priority in this state to take the burden off of families so every kid can go to school, get breakfast and get lunch, and have the ability to learn in a setting where now we have expanded universal pre-K into upstate New York. Along those lines, our transportation systems, we have record STOA funding at the state level for our public transit systems. We are establishing a bus rapid transit system that works here, that makes sure it gets to our higher ed institutions and our major employers and touches some of the areas of the district that have been most disenfranchised historically. So the work continues, and we are investing in those systems, and we will continue to. We have to acknowledge the problem, move forward, and yes, we have great opportunities that are coming. We can do both, and we have done both. I've not only supported universal pre-K, but also the Pathways to Apprenticeship, that is a huge program within the city of Syracuse to address the issues related to the I-81 project. And I took funding for the Manufacturers Association of Central New York's paid apprenticeship program from $750,000 to $1.75 million, which is transforming lives right here already in Central New York. Thank you.
There were a lot of facets in that question, and I think my first reaction was, I agree. Central New Yorkers have been here for generations. We are not a huge community, we're not a huge city. And what I mean by that is, if you live here, You were probably born and raised here. Your parents were probably born and raised here, your grandparents were. Or you're like my husband and you happen to marry somebody from here. But outside of that, we're not a very big transient community. So when Micron does come, you better believe that at the forefront of my attention is ensuring that Central New Yorkers are getting a piece of that pie. I talked about it a little bit earlier. Well, what does that look like? We know there's going to be many good paying jobs coming out of here. Let's ensure that the students that are going to school right here in one of our 7 higher institutions of learning, they have an opportunity for first digs at those big jobs. But what about the skilled labor jobs or the unskilled jobs that we have? Let's ensure that those get first dibs to Central New Yorkers that are already working here, that they are at wages that allow them to not only maintain a quality of life, but also to enjoy their life, to be able to go out to a movie or a ball game if they want, because they're not stressed out about where their money for the bills are going to come from. And what does that look like? It's ensuring that they have opportunities and access to professional certifications that are outside of traditional higher education venues. It's ensuring that we are using our community centers as gateways to these opportunities. It's ensuring that when we talk about entry-level jobs, they are truly entry-level jobs. They are not jobs that require 5 years of experience in a specific workforce field. These are entry-level jobs, and Central New Yorkers get first dibs at them. And again, to circle back to all of the other areas, transportation, housing, education, pre-K, all of those different facets of our lives, we must be ensuring that we are directly putting those services and programs in place for us here before the talent starts to come in. And let's talk very, very quickly about housing. Yes, we need to ensure that we have mixed use above, below, and at market rate. Sure, that makes sense. That's how corporations and developers make their money, right? But it doesn't help the community. So let's start pressing upon our governments to start paying for those projects so that it's not about profits and we can truly have below and at market rate housing that isn't price driven by our capitalistic market, yet driven by need in our community. Thank you.
Hello there, my name is Alfred, member of the Southside Coalition on Accountability for Equality and Social Justice. My question is, what measures are being taken to address the issues of ghost guns and preventing them from being used in criminal activities?
This one's hard. And the reason it's hard is because there is zero accountability right now. Because ghost guns can be bought from made of many different pieces that you can buy from many different realtors. Or they can be printed from a 3D printer. It is leaving cops useless in this scenario in terms of trying to figure out how we're getting these guns on our streets. So in terms of accountability, we need to go all the way to the top. This is federal government. There's a role for the federal government here. It's ensuring, number one, that gun manufacturers at large are starting to be held accountable for the deaths at their hands. What does that mean? Let's start making gun manufacturers carry insurance for every gun that is purchased from their manufacturing hub. That ensures that should there be a crime committed on their gun, they're part of the problem and they're going to be part of the solution. What else does that look like? It ensures that, well, we haven't talked about the legislation, so very quickly, because I am running for office, I feel like I need to let you know. I support comprehensive background checks, closing the boyfriend loopholes, red flag laws, any other common sense gun regulation that's on the table, you better believe I will support. But in terms of going back to this, sir, there's a role to start holding folks accountable throughout the entire manufacturing down to in the community levels. Let's start talking about removing AR-15s from circulation. I qualified on one of those in the military, the M16. I had to shoot it, I had to clean it, and I had to get it on target from about 30 feet away. If I went to war, that was my weapon that I was going to be handed. You better believe there is no room for those in our communities, and so let's start with an AR-15 ban, and we'll go on from there. We need to be doing more to protect our communities because lockdown drills are not the solution, nor is the solution when we have to react to a young adult that got a gun on a street and ended up killing a neighbor, a friend, or an opponent. This is not the way that Central New Yorkers are born and raised, nor is it the way that America functions. We need to start holding the corporations accountable for their actions, and it starts at the very top with holding gun manufacturers accountable through monetary means, which is the only language they understand. Thank you.
Today I'm proud to have been able to announce the support of Dr. Clem Harris, who was a very important voice in the conversations that had occurred, in this election. And he and I have had extensive conversations all along, and certainly over the past few weeks. And one of his number one issues, one of his platform points, major platform points, is addressing the issue of gun violence. And that's why we have to take continued action. In this state, we have some of the most restrictive gun laws in the country. And when you talk to district attorneys, even some of the most conservative ones, they will tell you that by and large, before the horrific racist act that occurred in Buffalo, New York, we had largely avoided mass shootings because of those restrictive gun laws and because of the ability to make sure that law enforcement and the Attorney General could proactively stop those. We have passed legislation in this state related to ghost guns, related to red flag laws, trafficking of those guns, manufacturing and transfer of those guns. And the penalties are there to make for a safer community. We need to translate those to the federal level. And just as I have delivered on my promises as it relates to childcare, education, voting reform, I will do the same when it comes to guns. It's not just ghost guns. We had an assault weapons ban in this country that was effective for 10 years, and it has fallen off the table. These are weapons of war, and we have to stop. I have my own piece of legislation related to swatting of schools, calling in a false threat of a shooting at a school. I was in those classrooms. I started my career before there were lockdown drills, and I ended my career in active shooter drills. Thank you.
You both spoke about de-escalation of violence in Gaza, and I was wondering if you could talk more specifically about what you see the role of Congress being in achieving the permanent ceasefire that the majority of voters support, and specifically, would you vote against military aid and weapons to Israel?
So as we said before, and I appreciate the question because the previous question was about how does Congress act? And when we're talking about actions like funding of systems, it is Congress that can do that. There are instances where executive action can occur, but ultimately it takes an act of Congress. So this is a dynamic situation and a complex situation. We lacked a Speaker of the House on October 7th, so that our Congress could not act at that time. So I would say that your question is a good one, but I have the Safe Haven Museum in my Senate district, which is the only location of Holocaust refugee resettlement in this country, is in Oswego, New York. It is just a few generations ago where the Holocaust had occurred. So we can debate about the establishment of the State of Israel many years ago. However, those actions were taken to make sure that we prevented the continuation of an attack on people just because of their religion, their race, their identity. And now, as we are in the midst of this conflict, we, as the largest power in this world, must stand with allies to say, if we are going to continue these actions, we need hostages to be released, American citizens who are hostages, and to broker an agreement where we can achieve peace and a two-state solution. The United States must continue to provide humanitarian aid, and we must make sure that when it comes to supporting any entity around this world, that we do it as a leader, pragmatically. So I do believe it is situational, and that situation is dynamic and ever-changing.
Would you mind repeating the last last portion of your question. I understand the narrative, but I want to make sure I'm able to answer your question.
Would you vote against military aid and weapons to Israel in order to achieve permanent ceasefire?
Ooh, when you cross them against each other, then it's an enticing question. For those that didn't hear, it was, would I approve military aid to Israel in order, if it meant that we could get a permanent ceasefire? This is a very challenging question because there are human lives at lost right now. There are human lives at stake. As somebody who's going to think about this through my defense background, Israel is an ally of ours. And we need to ensure that they have what they need to protect against the terrorist system of Hamas. That being said, in order for us to get to any sense of a bilateral ceasefire, we cannot ignore the humanitarian aspect of this situation. And that ensures that if we are going to continue to provide aid, there are a few things we must consider. What is the aid going for and how will it be used? If Israel is not able to clearly define a path for which they plan to use this military aid, then that is not a sufficient answer because of the death toll that we have seen already. Yes, we want a bilateral ceasefire to allow the hostages to return, to end the human death toll, but we need to recognize that there's a humanitarian stake here. There's a humanitarian initiative here at stake. I believe that there is an opportunity for the U.S. government to provide military aid, assuming that it does have, there's an opportunity for the U.S. government to provide military aid as long as there is a humanitarian component to it in relation to Palestinian people. You know, we already have a law on the books, the Leahy Law, that ensures that the U.S. government, Congress specifically, approves aid as long as it is through humanitarian efforts as recognized by international bodies of war. As of right now, we're not currently following that process. So to answer your question, ma'am, I think at the end of the day, let's start following the rules that are already on the books. We're making exceptions here, which are making folks vulnerable. It's ensuring that there is, as of right now, we haven't seen a de-escalation. So as we move forward towards a bilateral ceasefire, to move towards permanence and a two-state solution, let's start adhering to our own laws that are on the books. I think that's a good start. Thank you.
Hello. So I am a student, a recent graduate at Syracuse University. I wanted to say that Brandon Williams recently proposed a bill to ban students who had been protesting as part of the student encampment from receiving student loan tuition forgiveness or anything like that. I think that your response in regards to the situation in Gaza is severely insufficient because when you conflate the idea that the Holocaust is like a justification for another genocide, I think that's a completely immoral position to take. So my question for you and for both of you is, will you openly, publicly call for a ceasefire, call for the allowance of humanitarian aid into Gaza, and also call for the cessation of the tens of billions of dollars that we're sending to Israel every year? Syracuse, as a city, just with our federal tax dollars, sends $2 million to Israel every year, and we have, obviously, as you can all see, a lot more important things to spend those $2 million on. Thank you.
So I just want to clarify something. Of course, justification is a strong word, and I did not use the word justification, and there's a complexity over the course of hundreds of years involving this situation that is horrific. So, as I said, as a leader of the free world, we need to take action, and we have taken action in making sure that we are holding countries accountable. But as Sarah said, Hamas is a terrorist state that is currently holding American citizens hostage. And what do we want to achieve? We want to achieve peace for the people of Palestine, for the Gazans. We want peace for them. We want prosperity. We want lasting peace for them. And I think we all collectively also want peace and prosperity for the people of Israel. This is a complex situation that does not have a simple solution. It has not had a simple solution in my lifetime, nor anyone's lifetime here. It is complex. We must work towards peace. We must work towards protecting innocent life. If we are going to look at this in one way and on one side, we are not going to achieve that peace. We are not going to. I taught students on 9/11 that were Palestinian. And I watched them walk through those doors on September 12th. And I stood with those students at West Genesee High School. I remember their names, I remember the look on their faces, and I remember many of them not being able to return to school after what was the most horrific terrorist event against this country. I stand for peace, and I stand for the United States to be a leader in brokering long and lasting peace towards a two-state solution. And achieving that is not simple. This teacher and state representative does not have the answer to that. Because we don't have an answer to it. And if we are going to break our support of our alliance with Israel, that will not achieve peace in the Middle East.
Thank you for your question. Thank you for your interest. Again, I'll go back to the laws that we already have on the table, and we should start following them, ensuring that we are providing humanitarian aid during conflicts. Yes, Palestinians should receive humanitarian aid. We are all humans. This is a significant conflict. This is a war. And like I said earlier, as somebody who's lost troops to war, there is no winner in war. We must have a bilateral ceasefire, because until we stop the civilian death toll and return the hostages, we can never look, there will never be an opportunity to look at a future. There simply isn't a future on the table. We need to start looking at all of the angles. So yes, I support humanitarian aid. I support a bilateral ceasefire and ensuring that we give the region the stability that they need, because the U.S. does have a role on this, and it starts with following our own legislation that's on the table. Thank you.
Thanks. So again, I appreciate all the questions. I know we've got lots of additional hands still up. So here's what I'm going to do on the fly. So I've promised the candidates they can make closing statements. I've also promised the audience that we'll save a little bit of time for some mingling with the candidates, and I've promised the candidates they can leave at 8 o'clock. So we're tight. So here's what I'm going to do. If you still have something else you wanted to weigh on, and especially if it's an issue that we have not yet heard about, I'm going to circulate around the room, and I'm going to try to gather a couple questions from people, and then I'm going to give the candidates one final chance to respond, and then I'm going to ask for closing statements.
You mentioned the issue of democratic unity. Well, we have a situation around our nation where a significant portion of people in many different states have voted uncommitted or otherwise voted against supporting the president for re-election. How do you feel the party should deal with the situation of the extreme feelings and the extreme lack of unity in the party?
Thank you. And no response yet. I'm going to gather a couple of questions. Bear with me.
This is a Micron question. I am a member of a couple of the local groups here, CCAA, Solidarity. I haven't seen anything, even though I know individuals from groups in here have met and meet with Micron officials concerning a lot of the concerns that we've raised. But given that it's such a huge project, one of the biggest chip manufacturers in the world, their biggest plant in the world going in here, have you seen, or are you aware, maybe I'm missing something, of a comprehensive report of an independent organization that has a paid team of experts that has analyzed what they're going to do and the various different impacts, projected impacts on air, land, water, et cetera, local residents, the area, and are they making recommendations that use the best practices, environmental, et cetera, from around the world?
I just want to say, too wrong does not make it right. And the Holocaust, we're going to go back to the Holocaust. It was wrong. It was wrong from the European. It was wrong also from America. It was just said. Palestinian has nothing to do with it. Palestinian ended up with another Holocaust on them. You're talking about Hamas's terrorists? Right now in the West Bank, villages being leveled and built for settler. Hamas is not there. So we keep talking about Hamas, October 7. We're not talking about 1948. That's where the violence started. Not that's when it was peace. It was peaceful before that. Now you're telling me that two-state solution, you're saying that ceasefire, and we have a governor is giving money and giving weapon, and the Israeli saying, we don't care about you and what you want. We're going to take your money, we're going to take the weapon, and you cannot open your mouth because we have the special interest there giving the politicians money to vote for what we want. And we've been seeing that. So how you see that you're going to be doing two-state solution, or how you're going to be seeing doing ceasefire when Israel is saying the hell is you?
I'm Tanya Young from Citizen Action, member since 2013. I'll be brief. About a report by the Inspector General Office of the U.S. The Department of Health Services detailed how private insurance plans refuse to approve patient treatments and other allotments for prior authorizations such as me. And I gotta say, even though I'm a proud Syracuse City School District clerical employer, I still find it hard to attain these rights and stuff, and it's probably not right. But what I want to get to, will you advance legislation to force private health insurers to stop denying claims and overturn any existing denials for treatments recommended by medical professionals? And I'm also I'm on private health, I'm on Molina, and some of those carriers mentioned Aetna, Molina, United Healthcare, that operate Medicaid plans that were denied. And I'm part of Molina myself, and I'm having issues, so I just want to know what's going to be done by, I guess, both of you to improve on those matters.
Okay, so we really are tight on time. So
I think we got it.
we got healthcare, we got the war in Gaza, we got Micron, and we got voter unity against President Trump. Okay.
All right, so we'll start over here. The gentleman asked about President Biden. I've heard the complaints, I've heard the concerns, but at the end of the day, this is about saving democracy. We've seen this show. We saw it 4 years ago, folks. We are here to ensure that President Biden gets reelected. And you know how we help doing that? By running a reverse coattails program. I learned about this. Do you know what it is? It's where you ensure that the down ballot candidates have a proven history of exciting and turning out voters, knowing that if that down ballot candidate can bring folks out to the polls, they will vote Democrats straight down. So to you, sir, and anybody else concerned, let's do a stark contrast. He's a little old, he's a guy. Let's bring a short, spunky, high-energy female with more qualifications to the table and allow us to carry that ticket. Thank you. All right. Micron, sir, watching this very closely. I serve on the executive committee of the local Sierra Club. We've got 3,000 members strong here, and we are trying to chip away at the environmental process. But the best I can tell, no. There is not one single joint effort to ensure that Micron is being held to all of the standards that they committed to, while ensuring that Central New Yorkers get a piece of this pie. That is a role for the federal government. In the nation's largest public-private venture in history, absolutely the congressperson in that seat should be watching and ensuring that the pieces are moving properly so we don't get left behind in this venture, and yet our future is not at stake. Ma'am, thank you. That was a lot to share, and in full disclosure, I have a lot to learn. I have a lot to learn at the federal level, what we can and can't do beyond ensuring that we follow our own rules. There's a lot of history that I have been learning over the last few years, and there will be a lot more. But stabilization is absolutely where my mind goes to in terms of what that looks like. There's more for me to learn, ensuring that people can wake up in the morning without fearing for their lives in their own community. And ma'am, for you, we get through that with universal health care, Medicaid for all, whatever we want to call it. The moment we start restricting the ability to capitalize on medical debt, human health, we start moving away from being handcuffed to a capitalistic market. What can we do right now? We can start moving away, but we can also ensure that there are pre-authorization approvals for specific medical procedures that are relatively benign in the sense that they are not catastrophic. They are everyday issues. Because when you come to a barrier before you've even been able to access medical care, the system has failed you. So there are many things that we can do as we work towards universal health care, and I have many more thoughts. The bell rang, but thank you.
Thank you. I'll try to get through it very quickly. I will say on the issues where we have denials, my office currently works with those repeatedly. And not only do we address them and we address the plan that covers, but we also report those to the Attorney General's office. And we contact the Department of Health as well, and will continue to. I do think we have common ground on a number of different things, including the settlements. The settlement issue is something that the United States should have intervened in long before we got to that point. And that is why I continue to say we need a two-state solution where there is autonomy and there are partners outside of it to make sure that each of those two states are not infringing in the other's autonomy. That is a way that we can potentially get to lasting peace. Before there is a shovel in the ground, and people are critical of the fact that Micron has not started, I'm skeptical. I hear it all the time. Currently, before any shovel goes in the ground is an extensive environmental review that many would call overly bureaucratic, that is going to take time and cost money before we do a thing there. Does that give the assurance that there would not be any negative environmental impact? It's a start, but also we have the DEC, we have the EPA, and we have restrictions around what can be done at that site and what incentives can be received. And if those are violated, that goes away. The last thing I'll say is, we can talk about all of these items, but what we cannot tolerate is another presidency like we saw in 2016. This country is as great as it is because we can have these conversations in an open setting. It is our rights as citizens of this country to do that. Stand united, disagree, and go vote for Joe Biden. Period.
Okay, so thank you so much, everyone, for being here. We're not quite done yet, but I'm going to say a couple thank yous and let the candidates catch their breath for a second. There's lots more people catching my eye who I know had additional questions. You can have a few minutes to try to mingle with the candidates and see if you can ask your question one-on-one, but we will have to let them leave when they have to leave. And so I'm sorry we didn't get to everybody. So we're gonna, so let me just once again thank the good folks at ITC and the Syracuse City School District for allowing us to use the space. Thanks to all our partner organizations. They're all listed on the front of the table up front there. And we're gonna have closing statements. We're gonna start with Senator Mannion.
Thank you all for coming here tonight. Thank you for taking the time to be politically engaged in the system and to care. And I know that you don't leave this room and do nothing. You continue to fight for the causes that are important to you, our shared causes, for a more just, a more equitable country, and a more just and a more equitable world. I was a teacher for almost 28 years. I loved my job. I had the most gratifying job in the world. And I left the confines of a job that I loved and was gratifying because I could not watch what was happening in this country. I did that because I care about my children. I care about my grandkids. And we are not a perfect country. But this democracy has been sustained for a long time. And what we're in the midst of is the greatest risk to not just this country and its freedoms and its protections, but the world. The world is counting on us. So I could teach the scientific method and eutrophication of lakes. But more than that, I got to develop relationships with kids over the course of a generation. And these kids do not deserve that. They don't deserve it. We must stand up. Every day, one of my friends, one of my supporters, one of my former students, one of my colleagues says this: don't do this. Don't do it. And if we don't do it, we're left with the people in this country that will not put our fundamental rights first and will not worry about being the golden city on the hill that has led a democratic movement across this world and allowed democracies to thrive. It's our time. Get out there. Tell your friends. Tell your colleagues. Tell the people who will never vote for a Democrat that we've got to do this for their kids and their grandkids. So I don't teach in a classroom anymore. I teach in the Senate chamber, and I'm hoping to be teaching in the halls of Congress. And I ask for your support.
So thank you everybody for coming out tonight and participating in democracy. You've probably heard it before. This is the most important election on the table. I think my running theme for tonight is it's bigger than all of us. There's a lot at stake. There's a lot at stake not only for democracy, but globally, right? My children, I want them to grow up in an America that's better than where I left it. Not only in terms of human rights, but in terms of the environment, job quality, accessibility, equity, our healthcare systems. We have an opportunity in 2024 to change the way that Central New Yorkers get to live in our communities. And that is because this district is strongly held as a Democratic district, thanks to the line changes in redistricting. So what does that mean? That means that this primary is likely going to determine who holds this seat as a Democrat for the next 10 years. We don't have to play it safe. Let's start lining up. Let's start knocking those doors, ensuring that we're letting everybody know that we've got opportunities here. Line up and support your candidate that best reflects your values, because a Democrat is going to hold this seat for a while. All right? We haven't had anybody that has been able to break through the barriers because this seat simply hasn't been in our favor. It has changed and it's now in our favor. This is our chance. This is our moment. I'd like to thank you all for coming out tonight. I would love to earn your support. As you all know, it's time to go knock those doors. As somebody who lives in the field, I am super excited to walk with you, to knock with you. And at the end of the day, this is about ensuring that Democrats win, and we can only do that when we come together. And as we move towards November, it's ensuring that we have a candidate that has the contrast to beat Brandon Williams, that's able to peel off independent and Republican voters because they're speaking a values-based message that speaks to everybody in this region. I'm very excited to represent you. We're working hard, and I'd love to have you along. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. One last reminder, the primary is June 25th. Early voting starts on June 15th. You should vote, you should tell your friends to vote, and right now you got a few minutes to come meet the candidates if you'd like.